two, one, two, three.
Hello and welcome to Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Teresa Alt. I'm here today with Jay Lambrix. Jay, like me, is a member of Ithaca DSA, Ithaca Democratic Socialists of America. Today we will be talking about the idea of a national infrastructure bank. Jay Lambrix, is the idea of a national infrastructure bank new, or is there precedent for one?
I'm not a representative from the Coalition for a National Infrastructure Bank. That's the group that's primarily responsible for pushing this concept of a national infrastructure bank to finance public infrastructure. The idea of a national infrastructure bank actually has a very rich history. It's been implemented four times actually throughout the course of this nation's history. So it's not a brand new concept by any measure, actually. The last time that we had a national infrastructure bank was actually during the Great Depression. That's how Franklin Delano Roosevelt actually financed the New Deal. The New Deal that got us out of the Great Depression and actually ushered in an age of economic prosperity. That's how we paid for all kinds of amazing public programs and ushered in the modern version of the welfare state, actually. And before that, we had an infrastructure bank under the Abraham Lincoln administration during the Civil War. So that was primarily how we were able to defeat the South and preserve the Union. But the first Bank of the United States actually was created in 1791 and it expired in 1811 and it was created by Alexander Hamilton. So that's basically what kind of got us, that's what kicked us off as a nation. That's how we were able to build from almost nothing. The thing is, though, the latest iteration, and there's a this whole movement is actually centered around a real piece of legislation. It's called the National Infrastructure Bank Act of 2025. There have been a couple of other iterations as far back, I believe, as almost 2020 or even earlier. But this is the latest iteration. It was introduced in September of last year. And unlike other previous infrastructure banks, this one does not have a sunset clause. That's why we no longer have those national infrastructure banks, is because they expired. They were set to expire after a certain amount of time, and then they were not renewed. But this one doesn't have to be renewed. If it were to pass, through Congress, it would be basically in perpetuity. And you might be asking, well, what is a national infrastructure bank? In short, it would be a mixed ownership public corporation that operates alongside the budget to, finance needed infrastructure projects. The bill, as it currently stands, has the infrastructure bank being run by a board of 25 directors, so 25 members, and which would be nominated by the president and then approved by Congress. Half are slated to be builders and engineers, while the others would be state, local, and other kinds of public representatives, as well as bankers, minority and labor representatives. All would have to have experience in building infrastructure, and they would not be political. They would hopefully not be political or titular appointments. So they would it's designed to be as neutral as possible, but like we know here at the DSA, that's not always possible. So that's definitely something that needs to be, hashed out going forward. But what's really exciting, though, is that it is self-sustaining. So it doesn't require any kind of upfront federal funding. It's budget neutral, and it would be set to raise $5 trillion over the course of 10 years. The idea is that private holders of US Treasury bonds would invest up to 500 billion in exchange for 500 billion in preferred stock from the bank itself. So the idea is to attract investors with low interest loans. And once the bank is capitalized, it gets that initial seed funding. It can then lend up to 5 trillion over 10 years. And this amount hasn't really changed over the years. So I think, eventually they might need to update it. But as of the bipartisan infrastructure bill, it actually was projected to be able to cover everything that the bipartisan infrastructure bill could not fund. So it is a huge amount of money, and it really presents a chance for real change in this country. That's what really kind of caught my eye, is just, the scope of this kind of endeavor. And this is something that doesn't have to be partisan. It does not have to be partisan, but you would not be surprised to learn that is very, very partisan. It does not have a lot of Republican support. Surprise, surprise.
Because presumably Republicans want a monopoly for private banks.
Well, the thing is, the really interesting thing is that it should actually be attractive to Republicans because it is budget neutral, and that's something that they supposedly really care about. But what I have seen in my research is that it's not just Republicans that are actually opposed to this, because the way things are currently set up now with like the infra with transportation bills is that basically representatives, they vie for funding from a very limited pot that they can then bring back to their districts and say, hey, look, this is what I brought you. Whereas a national infrastructure bank would not be under their control. Anyone basically who can make an argument or meet the requirements for a loan from the National Infrastructure Bank can apply and get their project funded. So it's not something that politicians can just bicker over constantly and try to divvy up amongst themselves. So I think with a lot of politicians, it's this idea of relinquishing control.
Mhm.
It's supposed to be, kind of like a third party institution that's separate from direct federal control. And that's something, as you know, that a lot of politicians do not like.
Well,
But
you,
yeah, so
oh,
just going off of that, basically, who can borrow from the National Infrastructure Bank? Any public entity, state, county, city, utility, transit, housing, or port authority. And basically, anyone that owns public infrastructure, but the bill is currently set up that even if a private entity were to secure a loan, they cannot use that money to make something private. It can't be used for privately controlled infrastructure. So let's say like a toll road that's operated by a private company.
I will ask about
Hmm.
housing, for instance. Could it
That's
it
Mhm.
could build public housing, I think that's pretty obvious.
Oh yes.
Well, it
That
could build public housing if that weren't forbidden by the Faircloth Amendment, which anyway is a bad idea.
yeah.
Um,
But well, yeah, you are correct. You are correct. There are up to 21 priority project areas specified in the bill, and just a couple of the primary ones include, roads, bridges, transit, water infrastructure, electric grid upgrades, affordable housing, and one of the biggest is the funding of a high-speed rail network.
oh,
So
that
that
would
that
be
that's a
cool. We could
that
we
yeah.
could be more like Europe.
Yes, yes, that is one of the biggest goals, and that was part of the calculus for the $5 trillion was to have enough money to create well-connected, comprehensive network for the vast majority of the country. So, and that just happens to be one of my passions. Like I am very I am very much into high-speed rail, I would have to say. As someone who got to ride a train for the first time while living in Europe, I can tell you it's like going back 100 years when I came back to the United States.
It
It
is.
really is like living in a different century.
Yes.
So,
My
y-
my husband was participating in the translation of a classical Bulgarian novel from, I think, a little over 100 years ago. And there are humorous passages about riding a Bulgarian train, around the year 1900. It's like Amtrak. Well, my husband
yeah,
also one time
yeah.
took a train from Ithaca I mean, not from Ithaca, from
Hmm. Hmm.
Rochester, I guess, to
Yeah.
Chicago,
Hmm.
um, but had to wait a long time in Rochester because some freight trains had to go by first.
Yeah.
And in fact, his train was so late that he missed the first session of the meeting that he was supposed to attend.
Hmm.
And he found himself having a lot of trouble explaining to a Polish participant that his passenger train was late because it had to wait for a freight train.
Yes. Yes. It's legally speaking, Amtrak is supposed to have priority on our rail system, even though they share the track with private train, with
Conrail,
commercial
right?
train, yeah, private commercial train operators. But in practice, commercial train haulers have priority, not passenger. Even though legally speaking, Amtrak should be given that priority. I have a saying, if you're in Japan and the train is 5 seconds late, you have every right to complain. If you're in Europe and the train is late by 2 minutes, you have every right to complain. If you're in the US and the train is late by 5 hours, that's just normal business. It's
Yes.
and that happened to me one time. My train was delayed by up to 3 hours. We were stuck mid-transit behind a commercial freight train going 15 miles per hour. And they were doing that for 3 hours. So I could have gotten on my bike and beat it. I could have I could have beat the train. So yeah, and anyway, yeah, this is really exciting, and yeah, I mean, of course, affordable housing is a big part of what we really prioritize here at DSA, and it's something that I always think of when I think of the National Infrastructure Bank is this idea that like even with all of our ambition, oftentimes we're talking about putting band-aids on a gaping wound, and I really like talking about, big ideas and big projects, thinking, as big as we possibly can. And that's why I get so excited about things like the National Infrastructure Bank, and it is gaining sponsors. It has been getting more and more interest every year. They keep reintroducing it. Unfortunately, it has not moved. Like it was introduced and it's been put forward to a bunch of different committees, all within the same day of the same month, and it has not moved since. But as of right now, the Coalition for a National Infrastructure Bank, is getting the word out, securing more co-sponsors, getting more getting more endorsements. And I think,
Yeah.
that's the really exciting part. I mean,
Yeah.
like, obviously we would love for it to be passed by now, but it's gaining steam.
Is it in
So
both houses? I mean, is
um
it in both Senate and House
as
of
of
Representatives?
let's see, I have the latest action written down here. As of again, everything was done on the same day as of the 15th of September of 2025. It was introduced in the House of Representatives. And it was it was sponsored directly by Danny K. Davis of Illinois, District 7. He's a Democrat.
Uh-huh.
And as of right now, it has 63 House co-sponsors. So it does have some sponsorship, but yeah, as of right now, it has not moved at all,
Okay. Well,
unfortunately.
that is not a majority of the House by any means.
Nope, not by any means. Although, as of I believe last year, it was endorsed by and officially adopted as part of their platform by the Democratic National Committee.
Well, that's something.
But you would never know that though, because I never hear it in the news. I will attend meetings and webinars hosted by the Coalition for a National Infrastructure Bank, where I try to, you know, gauge where everyone is, and it seems like everybody's excited and ready to go, but then I never hear anyone talking about it in the news. So, um,
Well, here we
but
are
they do
going on
have an
radio.
option though. They do have an option at the Coalition for a National Infrastructure Bank to like reach out and request a presentation. Like so, I think in the long run, at Ithaca DSA, it would be exciting to reach out to the coalition. It's composed of advocates as well as the co-sponsors of the actual legislation, and to see if maybe we can get, maybe a couple of those sponsors, especially maybe a couple of sponsors from New York State, to maybe, talk to us about, why they're co-sponsoring the legislation and maybe what they would like to see from us as an organization. Just to, I don't want to get over my skis or anything
Yeah.
like that, but just getting the conversation going, I
Yeah.
think would be, a
That's
good way
how
to
things
start.
start.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Just, start
Okay,
talking and see where it
so
takes
let's
us.
see. I think I have a few more questions and thoughts. Um, so you said there would be state and I think also local representatives on its board. How would they be chosen? Do you know, is that clear?
Yes. So as it currently stands in the bill, and I, I took a step back when I heard this as well, but it's run by 25. The board of directors will have 25 members, nominated by the president and approved by Congress. So half will be builders and engineers, and others will be state and local officials, bankers, minority, and labor representatives. As as far as I can tell, it sounds like all of them will be nominated by the president. So that, does present kind of a quandary because even, in this day and age, when we think about appointees that are not political, somehow they manage to be political in this day and age. Even despite the best intentions of any kind of legislation where they're trying to look for impartiality. I mean, like, look at what happened with the reflecting pool. Like, so it's definitely an interesting conversation. I mean, this legislation, has been around for a while, and it assumes, I think, to a certain degree, a functioning democracy. So
Which may or may not last.
yeah, and that is something, it's really interesting because as of right now, it's been endorsed by, the DNC, Democratic National Committee, but it has not been endorsed by any national Republican groups. They do have a couple of individual co-sponsors or advocates here and there that are either independent or Republican, but that's usually at the local level. But the thing is, and I've been thinking about this a lot, is that unfortunately, I think it would have to be a partisan thing. It would probably have to be adopted by and only by the Democrats, or or third parties like the Green Party or their independents. And I think that's unfortunately, I don't think it has a chance of going through a Republican led legislature, and part of me hopes that it does not, because with this amount of money, that we're talking about, $5 trillion, it does make me a little bit nervous, but that's something I think that we, during any kind of presentation, at least afterwards during the Q&A, if we talk to anyone from the coalition, that's something that we should really, hammer home and ask for the details, is like, how do you protect this amazing piece of legislation from corruption and from mismanagement? Because if the president of the United States is picking the board of directors, are we going to have someone like RFK Jr. being appointed to the board? Like, like, are just because, they're supposed to not be political or titular appointments, does that still mean anything in the age of Trump? So I think
Well, I
that's
don't think it'll happen under Trump.
right.
Yeah.
Right. And I
And
think, it was meant from the
which,
very beginning to be very much, a bipartisan thing, to be very much this, non-political issue, but I think that ship has sailed.
yeah. Well, let's see, maybe for a few more questions.
Yeah.
One thing that it apparently is not is anything like the earlier kind of federal bank that was the postal bank, a postal bank. That is also sometimes being suggested. But,
I'm not as familiar with that. The
well, I
postal
think
bank.
the idea of a postal bank is that it's small individual accounts,
Right. Mm.
um, taking advantage of the fact that there are neighborhoods where there are no banks, but there are post offices.
Right. Right.
Uh,
Yeah, that was that it seems to me, and I'm not an expert, but it seems to me that was a little more focused. Like it
yeah.
dealt with
Yeah, I mean,
one
that's small accounts.
specific
That's
issue.
not, and it
Yeah.
sounds like this is not for an individual to have an account there.
Right. This is more like this, it kind of goes to the question of, like the federal, state, and local side of things. Like, you brought up at one point, we were talking earlier about the the State Bank of North Dakota. I think this has more in common with the State Bank of North Dakota than anything else. This has been talked about at the state level for quite a while. I do know that years ago, I believe there was talk of a state level infrastructure bank in New York State,
Uh-huh.
actually. So there
Could
was
be.
talk about this. And I think the main reason is kind of, it kind of harkens back to the, debate about Medicare for all. Like, do we pursue it at the state level? Do we pursue it at the federal level? Like, I think clearly when you're talking about this kind of legislation, $5 trillion is a lot easier. It's a lot easier to really raise those funds at a national level. But if it's never going to happen, then do we pursue a state, you know,
A state version. I think
yeah, a
there
state version.
exists a different organization that works for state banks.
Right.
Um,
It is that,
mhm,
chicken or egg. Like, do
yeah,
you have the state bank first to kind of push it at the national level, or do you hold out for the national
yeah.
version?
Would it eliminate private banks?
No, 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 no. It's specifically for infrastructure and public
Mhm.
infrastructure only. It's not And like I said, they private institutions can borrow, but as long as they are putting it towards public infrastructure, like roads, broadband. Like when we're talking about, like broadband is actually another key component.
Uh-huh.
But we're talking about broadband, like broadband providers, internet providers, national, grid providers, energy companies, that's sort of thing. We're talking about like, let's say, for example, long distance transmission lines. Like a private company may apply for those loans, but they have to go to projects that are creating public good, that are accessible by the general public.
I see. So it could actually help private banks do certain kinds of projects.
Right. And there is room in this current iteration of the bill for other banks to do collaborative work with the National Infrastructure Bank. So it's not meant to replace, but it does leave the door open for potential cooperation. But it's its own separate thing.
So sounds like a very interesting uh, enterprise, let's call it.
It is, and
Yeah.
I mean, and again, it attracts it tries to attract investment with, low interest loans. It's gonna be fully backed by the federal government, so there's very little risk involved. And when we're talking about, people who are applying for these kinds of projects, this idea of very low risk is very attractive. I mean, like look at, you know, like all these, private companies that are clamoring for government contracts. Like there's very little risk for them involved. And, this is basically taking that concept of a very low risk and, trying to create public good out of it instead of directly financing public enterprise like SpaceX or X or whatever X we're talking about these days.
Okay, well, thank you, Jay Lambrix,
You're
for
welcome. Always happy to. Yeah.
bringing up the idea of a national infrastructure bank. This has been Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Teresa Alt. Thanks for watching.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.